Hey all, this is Erin Port with Perfectly Port Family, and today we are talking Intentionally Yours Marriage Webinar, and I am so excited that you're here today. And I just wanted to do a few housekeeping things. Make sure that as you're doing the 5-day email challenge that you are going ahead and tagging me on Instagram or Facebook so that you can be entered into a date night giveaway that I will be sending to you. So make sure you're tagging me. Make sure you're doing those 5 days of challenges. I know it's challenging me in my own marriage. My husband came home and he asked me last night whether I had completed my challenge or not. So he's holding me accountable. So as you're hopping on, go ahead if you can and let me know your first name, how long you've been married, and what state you're watching from. I'm going to be going ahead and switching back and forth between the slide presentation and my face. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I hope that you are having a great day. The first thing I wanted to share with you is a story about when we were first married. So not 13 years ago. I'm pretending. 12 years ago, we had just gotten married. We had just built a house, and I was home on summer vacation from teaching first grade, and my husband had come home for lunch. And funny story, I walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway, and I tripped over my husband's size 11.5 shoes. And I just remember, I'll never forget thinking, oh my goodness, his blessed shoes, bless his heart. We are finally married. We are finally together. We had dated for 5 years, so I was just so happy we were together. Okay, so fast forward, almost 12 years. I was coming in the door the other day with my 2.5-year-old slung over my shoulder. I was coming in with groceries, so I had my other arm full of groceries, and I did one of those one-woman band situations where I kicked my leg to kick the door open, and I tripped over my husband's blessed shoes. Right? How quick in marriage we can go from those blessed shoes to those blessed shoes. And I know I'm not alone, because in the day-to-day demands of jobs and chores and to-do lists, and I haven't even mentioned kids yet, and the trials and tribulations and the joys of life, it is so hard not to get wrapped up with the frustrating parts of marriage. But marriage is meant to be a gift. So I want to share with you how we can solve this problem of being more intentional in our marriage today. I don't have all the answers. I don't have it all figured out, but I'm going to share my mess and make it my message so that you don't feel alone and so that we can all be encouraged in our marriage today. So the first thing I want to share with you is that marriage is meant to be a gift from God. It's not a gift that you need the return policy for, or a gift that you need to know to have the gift receipt for. 1 in 3 marriages these days end in divorce. And I don't want to be that statistic. And I know you don't want to be that statistic either. And one of the most common things I hear from women is, I just don't have time. And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but we all have 24 hours in a day, and we have to choose wisely. So marriage is meant to be a gift from God. If we go back to the beginning of the world, we can go back to Genesis, the first chapter of the book of the entire Bible, and God gives us the gift of marriage. But first, he creates the heaven and the earth, day and night, the sun and the stars. He populates the world with beautiful creation, both plants and animals. And then he saves his best for creation for all, us. First, he creates Adam in his image. And when he could find no suitable helper, he takes from Adam a rib, and he creates his helper, Eve. It says in Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. First Adam and then Eve. And it says this in Genesis 1:24, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united, and they become one flesh. Right there, the very first chapter of the Bible, God gives us the gift of marriage for companionship and to find encouragement with one another on this earth. We will not have marriage in heaven. It is an earthly gift. And so we need to enjoy and cherish that gift that God has given us. But he doesn't leave us alone in our marriage, thankfully. He also is a part of our marriage. It says in Ecclesiastes 4:12, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. Our marriages are strongest when God's at the center or the foundation. When we keep God in his rightful place in our hearts, our marriages flourish. But how quickly we can remove God from our marriages and from our hearts. So that brings me to the very first point I want us to consider today. It's actually day 2 of the challenge. So if you read your day 2 challenge, you'll know that I asked you to evaluate your relationship with God. It's important that as we tend to our relationship with our husbands, that we first tend to our relationship with God. You might be thinking, we're talking a bit about marriage here. What does this have to do with anything? Well, Paul David Tripp, a great author and speaker, says this: romance is the result of a good marriage, not the cause. Worship is the cause. And how often in society we are told that romance will lead to a greater marriage. When all our reality, that's not how it works. First, we need to tend to our relationship with God, that will then tend to our relationship with our husband, and then that will result in romance. When I was a young mother, first staying home with my, at that time, just one child, I started attending a Bible study. And I was new in my faith and didn't really know much about the Bible, but these older women, Titus 2 older women, started to teach me how to love my children and love my husband. And they pointed me back to Scripture. They pointed me back to God. And as they did that, I learned about God's character. I grew in my relationship with him. And as a result, I was a changed wife and a changed mother. Now, I am not where I desire to be. I still fall short all the time. But I'm confident in this. In Scripture, it says, he who began a good work in us will work on it till completion. But the more we invest in God and the more we know about him, our relationships will then be reflex. The greater our relationship with God, the greater our relationship with our husband. So let me ask you this question. How's your relationship with God? Shortly after Lucy was born, she was about 5 months old. We were at church on a Sunday, and the pastor asked us, or told us about this marriage conference. Actually, it was Paul David Tripp's conference. And we listened, and we got in the car, and my husband said to me, I think we should go to that marriage conference. Mind you, I was thinking in the back of my mind, well, what do you think's wrong with me? Do you think something's wrong in our marriage? Or do you think we're in crisis? I mean, oh my goodness, what's going on? I'm thinking this. Thankfully, I did not say it because that probably wouldn't have been good. And of course, I had a list of excuses a mile long because if you know anything about our story, you know that we miscarried and we struggled with secondary infertility after that miscarriage. And Lucy really was a gift from God when she finally arrived. And what happened was I totally zoned out the rest of the world and just focused solely on her. And as a byproduct, I totally neglected Scott and I totally neglected my relationship with God. It's important that we don't neglect our relationship with God and our husband. And thankfully that time in my life, God really used to mend our relationship. And I'll share a little bit more about that later. All right, so now that we know we need to tend to our relationship with God, the next thing we need to think about is that we are all imperfect and we need grace. We know that if we go back to the first chapter of Genesis, that it didn't end with God gifting us the gift of marriage. Adam and Eve sinned and therefore separated themselves from God, and imperfection entered the world. We know that the only perfect person that walked the earth was Jesus, and he went to the cross, to save us by grace alone, not by anything that we could do. And so we are imperfect and we are all in need of grace. So a couple of years ago, well, several years ago now, I was asked to be on an interview team for our new district superintendent. It was a huge honor. I was so excited. So I squeezed into this really tight powder blue Ann Taylor suit. I was 6 months pregnant, so I was using a rubber band to get it all to stay together, you know. A hope and a prayer that it would stay in one piece. And I dashed off in my Volkswagen Red Beetle down the main drag of our city. And when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw not one, but 2 cop cars with flashing lights. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is going on? I hope nobody sees me. And I hope I'm not late for this really important interview. So I rolled down my window and I said, officer, what's going on? And he said, ma'am, Have you paid your license plate tags this year? Well, I answered with, I don't know, my husband takes care of that, which is not a good answer. And it does not get you out of a ticket. He proceeded to write me a ticket for the cost of the tags ×2, which was a hefty amount and a lesson learned. I dashed off to the interview, but you better believe as soon as that interview was over, I started in on a phone call with Scott. How dare you forget to pay the tags? How dare you embarrass me? Do you know what it felt like being pulled over in the middle of town? And you can imagine the list went on, and I continued on him. In that moment, I forgot that we are all imperfect. I expected him to be perfect. I expected him to pay that bill. That's an unfair expectation to put on him. We are all imperfect. And one of the things I want to remind myself and you is that we cannot expect perfection from our spouses when we do not have perfection to offer. We are imperfect, therefore we need to bestow grace. And if we can bestow grace, then grace will be bestowed unto us. Along those lines, it's important to remember that the word expectations can kill a marriage. Oftentimes we expect our spouse to do this or that, and when they fail to do that, we feel wounded, and we put that on our spouse. We say they are not good at this, when in all actuality, we have unfair expectations. Last summer, we went downtown. My husband just randomly took the day off before school started, and we headed downtown as a family. And we put some things in a picnic basket, some toys, and we headed down to the sculpture park and let the kids play in these cute little ponds down there. And it was just the best day. I mean, at one point we were laying in the grass, all 5 of us, looking up at the sky and imagining different things we see in the clouds. It's like those things that are just out of a movie. And it was one of those days that will go down in infamy for our family because everyone had a blast. But when we tucked in our kids, or we buckled in our kids at the end of the day and we hopped into the car to head home, I told my husband, I said, that was a really great day. And he said, yep, it was. And I said, you know why I think it was such a great day? Because I had absolutely no expectations. It was great because I didn't expect anything. I didn't expect my kids to do this. I didn't expect my kids to do that. I didn't expect anything out of the day. I had no idea what to expect. And as a result, it was an awesome day. How often our expectations can kill or ruin a situation. I was just thinking about Valentine's Day next week, okay? And there's like this unwritten expectation that our spouses should get us a gift. I mean, society tells us that, right? So last year, Scott walked in the door without anything in his hands on Valentine's Day. And I was like, oh, I mean, isn't it an expectation you get your wife flowers? I mean, but you're not going to say that because you don't want to be that person. But you're in your mind, you're thinking of this. And therefore, my night was like jaded as a result. Well, on February 15th, my husband walked in the door with flowers. And do you know why he walked in the door on February 15th? Because he knows I'm frugal and hate spending over the amount that it's needed on something like that. He knew that if he waited till February 15th, he would save money, which would make me happy and get me flowers. He was totally thinking, but I let my expectations ruin what could have been an awesome moment because of that. So just remember that expectations can kill. I have to remind myself of that often, like daily or hourly. All right, so the next point I want to think about is overcome neglect in your marriage. This is where a lot of people ask, I just don't have time. I don't know how to invest in my marriage. We have young children. How do you do it? Well, like I said, everybody has 24 hours in a day, and quantity is not over quality. Sometimes spending 10 quality minutes with your husband is better than 2 hours. Because if you put your phone down and you have a face-to-face conversation with you, look each other in the eyes and have a real conversation, that's better than a distracted conversation. My husband will often make fun of me because he'll ask me a question and I'll be like, uh-huh. And he's like, do you know what you just said to me? I mean, I could be, agreeing to all sorts of crazy things because I'm distracted. So quality over quantity. Overcoming neglect. Remember that Paul David Tripp conference we went to? Remember I said I really didn't want to go? Well, we dropped our kids off in the nursery. It was all okay. I got over my list of excuses and we sat down in the sanctuary. And I have to tell you, they were pews and I was sitting over here and Scott was sitting over here. There was visible and emotional space between us. And that to make matters, and to make matters worse, the couple in front of us were probably like married for 6 months and totally caressing one another. I mean, if PDA needed to be called out, they needed to be called out. I just thought to myself, you've got to be kidding me. We got sat next to like the model couple, and here we are sitting back here. Maybe we really do need some help. But that was the condition of my heart when we showed up to that marriage conference. But by the end of the weekend, spending that quality time with my husband, spending that quality time with God, he brought us closer together. We overcame that neglect. And it was not purposeful, but we had become roommates in our marriage. Maybe you've become roommates. It's that feeling of crossing in the night. You take care of this, I'll take care of this. You do that, I'll do that. And it all of a sudden just becomes like your roommates. And it can happen without anybody even intentionally doing it. But we have to be intentional about choosing not to be. And in that moment, I had chosen to just live in my little newborn bubble, as we often do, and fail to tend to my relationship with God and Scott. And that moment jolted me back to realizing I could do all three. I could tend to all three. It's important in your marriage to take time to communicate. Scott and I didn't take time to communicate in that time. And so therefore we kind of fell away day by day, just fell away from one another. But thankfully, God brought us back together. I think of a marriage oftentimes as a garden. All right. I have the biggest brown thumb known to man, but every year as a family, we tend to our garden and we cultivate it and we pick out the perfect plants. Cheaper is better because it's less painful when they die. But we get it all set up, and every day I go out and I water the plants and I pick those tiny weeds. And if you pick a weed every single day, you might notice they're easy to pluck. They just right out of the ground. But last summer we went away for vacation on the hottest week of the summer. I'm not kidding you. It was like scorching. And I came home and my plants were shriveled and my tomatoes were black and I had weeds. I seriously think they ate all the fertilizer. They were so huge. And when I went to pull that weed out of the garden, I pulled the top and I left the root. And I had to kind of dig around to get that root out so it just wouldn't pop right back up. And that's how that's how marriage is. If we communicate daily and pull out those little things that maybe irritate us or we need to work on or we need to fix or you want to talk to your spouse about, it's easy to just pluck them out. But if we brush them under the rug or we don't tend to the garden, the weeds start to grow. And the bigger they grow, the harder they are to pluck. And the harder it is to bring your garden back to that glorious, flourishing garden that you desire. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about today is to serve your spouse. Now, this is hard because we are serving what we feel like is people all day long, right? I have a lineup at dinner time. It sometimes looks like a lunch cafeteria with their little plates, and I'm loading up all my kids, and then I'm kissing heads, and I'm putting people to bed, and our husbands can take care of themselves is what I often think. Like, they're an adult. I have all these other people I have to take care of. They can take care of themselves. But really, God calls us to serve our spouses. They are a gift to us. So in the beginning of our marriage, we operated under what I call a currency exchange, where if you've ever been out of the country, you go to this little window and you say, I have $50 and I want something back, and they give you something back. That's how my husband and I operated. I give you this and you give me this in return. And I'll be perfectly honest, for me, it was, I'll give you sex if you give this to me back. And that's how we operated for a long time because I didn't know a better way. And it worked, kind of. It kind of worked. But what happened was, if I offered you what I offered you and you didn't offer it back, failed expectations, disappointment, and frustration in our marriage. Our pastor once sat us down and said, there's a better way to serve your spouse without asking anything in return. Selfless love. Actually, biblical love is agape love in the Bible. And agape love is not the feeling love, that's phileo love, but agape love that God's referring to in marriage is an action and a choice. We are choosing and we are acting on that love for our spouse. So to serve our spouse without expecting anything in return. That's hard. It's a hard reality to get into, but the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. And at first you're going to feel like, I did that for you. Especially, I'm an acts of service kind of girl. My love language is acts of service, and that's coming up on the daily challenges in the email. You will actually get to see what kind of love language you have, but I'm an acts of service girl. So therefore, I love to do things for people, and I like to receive my love through an act of service. So it's hard for me not to say, I did this for you. Can you do this for me? But it's so much sweeter when our spouses do something without initiation on our part, because they just do it because they love us. Like last Sunday, I shared on Instagram, I was leading worship. And so I had to get up early. That meant, Scott, when you serve as a family, even though there's only one of you up there actually leading. And so Scott had to get the kids out the door. He had to get them dressed. We hadn't given them a bath the night before, so we had to give all three of them a bath. The list goes on and on. But he took the time to bring me up coffee, even though it's decaf, because he knows it would make me happy. He didn't expect anything in return. He knew it would make me happy. And that's years of us practicing that. That doesn't happen overnight, but let me encourage you to just serve your spouse and become a student of him, to learn what little things you can do to just show him that you love him. It's going to be really important that you take that love languages quiz tomorrow, and for him to take it as well, so that you know how to use your love wisely. You know, oftentimes we show love the way we receive it. And if time really is an issue, it's important that we're really intentional about showing our love in the way that our spouse best receives it. Serving our spouse. Now, I've walked through some really difficult times with friends in recent years, where no matter what they did, their spouse wasn't willing to come back, to fight for their marriage. And I get it. I get it. I have walked through those seasons with dear friends, and it is painful. But what I kept encouraging my friends is, your God, your Father, sees every action. Not one of them goes unwasted. And at the end of your life, he will say to you, good job. And now that though it doesn't bring any immediate satisfaction, knowing that God sees everything, and he sees our heart, and he sees our desire, that should bring us comfort, even in difficult situations. And it should bring us comfort in all situations, that God is always with us. As I told my husband I was going to share about this, he said, well, you started with a story that kind of said, those blessed shoes to those blessed shoes. And he said, you know, there are so many things that increase and become more beautiful, like that garden, with time and with cultivation and with really digging in and doing the hard work. And I said, oh, okay. So what would you say has improved with time in our marriage? And he got a funny grin on his face. And I said, don't you dare. And we both laughed, and I turned bright pink. And that's the thing about my husband. I'm really hard to fluster, and I'm really hard to embarrass, but he can do it, and it's good for me. See, where I am weak, he is strong. And whereas he is weak, I am strong. And where we're both weak, God is strong. And that's why it's so important to keep God at the center of your marriage, to remember why you love your spouse, to serve him, and to overcome neglect. If we are intentional in our marriages, we will look back today and we will say thank you to ourselves right now, because someday, Lord willing, our kids are going to grow up and they're going to leave home, Lord willing. And we are going to be thankful for the investment we made today. Just as you invest in your 401k for retirement, invest in your marriage. I promise you it will reap dividends not only today, but in the future. So I hope that helps you. I hope you have questions before we sign off. I'd love for you to leave a note in the bottom. Otherwise, we have 3 more days of intentional marriage challenge. And I'd love for you, like I said, to go ahead and tag me on Facebook or Instagram and share with me how you are living out your challenge this week. Let me know if there's anything else I can help you with. Until next time, keep on keeping on.